This is Brad Russell with Faith Village. Today we welcome Steve Mansfield, who's actually in Washington, D.C. We certainly were intrigued to sit down with you. You recently have authored the book, The Mormonizing of America, how the Mormon religion has become a dominant force in politics, entertainment, and pop culture. People have remarked for this campaign season how evangelicals, for instance, have in some ways surprisingly embraced a Mormon candidate and raised very few of their kind of historic theological concerns about the Mormon belief system. Is it that we both rose from the same experiential soil, or how would you account for that?
Well, I think it begins with a context right now in which evangelicals in particular are so eager to have soulmates politically. They've been disenfranchised, they've had their leaders let them down, and they despise, as far as you can despise your own president and be a Christian, they despise Barack Obama. I mean, he's certainly one of the most pro-abortion presidents we've ever had, and of course, I'm sure that all the allegations about him being Muslim and all the culture that you know of opposition to him makes Christians just so eager to defeat Barack Obama that that's where it starts. Then they look at Mitt Romney, and whereas 2 years ago they would have been doing seminars on how Mormonism is an antichrist religion, they realize he shares most of their political values, if you're talking about the conservative portion of the Christian world in America. So I think what's happened is that people have said, look, Mormonism's an issue. It's not near an issue as big as issue as babies dying and massive debt and, a man getting up and declaring that we no longer live in a Christian America. So I've had politicians and major religious figures in America say kind things about my book, but then go, shh. And what they meant was, let's not talk about that now. We'll bash Mormonism later when he's president. Let's just get the other guy out of office. So there are common roots, there are common values. I mean, certainly you can respect the political values of Mitt Romney if you're conservative, and you can respect what the Mormons have accomplished. The thing I've written in a blog recently is we need to be able to hold two thoughts in our minds at the same time. Christian truth is often like that. We have free will and the sovereignty of God, and they're both true, and the revelation of God is somewhere between the two. We're never going to resolve that. Or we are saved, but we are also being saved. Both are true. Well, the same thing is true here. On the one hand, Mr. Romney represents the values that many of us have. Great. On the other hand, Mr. Romney is a Mormon, and Mormonism rewrites every cardinal Christian, traditional, biblical, creedal, value that's an example of creedal Christianity, traditional Christianity. So we don't have to let go of the one to do the other. This was my problem with what Billy Graham did, a man I revere, obviously. Of course, it wasn't him; it was Franklin. But you don't have to go silent about the theological issues and the deformities in Mormonism and the criticism it brings to biblical Christianity in order to vote for a man who is Mormon. You can do both at the same time. In fact, the political context may give you a chance to articulate a clear opposition or apologetic about Mormonism. And so I think that what's happened is most of the Christian world's gone silent. It's either mired in ignorance. We know that 63% of Americans know nothing about Mormonism, they say, or evangelicals do know about Mormonism, but they simply are going silent until after the election, considering it the lesser of two evils.
Well, it certainly does seem that a kind of political pragmatism has kind of trumped ideology for some people, and that's ironic among people who have valued belief systems and worldviews so strongly. But even outside evangelical faith, people have simply observed, like Joanna Brooks today did in a blog at Religion Dispatches, that religion has just gone silent in this campaign season. When we have such religious divergence among the candidates, and yet America seems to either decided that it's a non-issue or has chosen a political correct path to not discuss it.
Yes.
Or there's too much baggage on both sides that no one wants to bring up.
And of course, I feel a little bit, I mean, everybody feels this way, I suppose, when they write books, but just a small amount, like prophet in the wilderness, so to speak, because, and I know I'm not the only one, because I'm saying, look, religion's important. We don't want religious tests. Those are forbidden by the Constitution. And we don't want religious bigotry. But we need to understand what a candidate believes. As I often say, if a man's faith is sincere, it's the most important thing about him, and it will tell you more about how he's going to lead than almost anything else. And we have allowed people for far too long to be elected to office in the United States without asking just relevant questions. And I mean that on both sides. Ronald Reagan was pondering Armageddon from books he had chosen for himself while he was president, and wondering if he had some role with Armageddon. George W. Bush said Jesus was his favorite political philosopher because he changed his life. Well, I mean, I'm thrilled. Don't misunderstand. I'm an evangelical hot dog. I would have met him at the altar. But still, the Americans didn't know what that meant, you know. And then what does Barack Obama believe? We have a prayer breakfast talk this past spring where he sounds like Billy Graham, and it's a matter of weeks before he supports same-sex marriage, which most, of course, traditional Christians think is a complete sin. And now, of course, Mitt Romney, when you combine the number of people who don't have any clue what Mormonism is, with the number of people who have decided to go silent, it's why we're having an election in which there's not been a religious airing. And I have to say, Rick Warren's a friend of mine, but I was deeply disappointed when he didn't have the Faith Forum. He was so turned off by what was happening, he didn't have the Faith Forum. That was an environment where you could have asked some of the relevant questions. And so I had just make like 30 seconds at the table with some folks in the Republican Party, and I said, have him talk about his faith. Have Mr. Romney talk about his faith. And he said 3 words in his convention speech. 3 words. We were Mormon, Right. So I agree with the Mormon writer that you're mentioning, you're referencing. And I think that we really have got to get more sophisticated about faith, or we are setting ourselves up for some real problems down the road.
Well, it just makes us wonder if our political leaders, whether they're Mormon or Christian or whatever, that take a nominal kind of a nominal path for their faith and their religious values and truth really don't influence their policies all that much. Although with Mormonism, you have to wonder if you believe in the divine inspiration of the U.S. Constitution, if you believe in eschatology where Jesus returns and rules from Jerusalem and Missouri, if you believe that progressive revelation can trump any authority at any time, those seem to be really valid beliefs that can have a lot of impact on the way one leads.
Well, and I was just in Israel like 36 hours ago, and I asked some of the political leaders there, now tell me, do you have any problems with Mormons? I hear sometimes they say, yeah, we have to watch out because the Mormons believe that Jesus will reign from a Mormon Jerusalem in the millennium. Well, that means they have an agenda to kind of gain authority or gain place or gain position. And this Israeli politician said, look, they're not dangerous like Nazis or something. They're not dangerous like, the Islamists, but they are trying to take Jerusalem slowly, progressively over the years. We have to keep an eye on that. Well, that's not something we're talking about back here. So, I think people know pretty much where I come from. I'm pro-life, and I'm pro-free market, if not pro-big business. And I'm pro-family and so on. I mean, my lean in this election is obvious. So I'm talking about something broader than this election, and that is that we need to understand what a man's religion is, not as a matter of bigotry, but as a matter of knowing how he's going to rule. For example, I like Mr. Santorum very much. I agree with most of his policies. When he started talking about outlawing birth control, well, that comes straightly out of his Roman Catholic faith. It's not a faith I share, nor a specific policy issue I share. And I was at least proud of him for bringing it up right up front, rather than talking American mishmash religion and then getting in office and then proposing a bill outlawing all birth control. So this is an example of where we ought to have a good faith airing before we get to that point. And the problem is, as you know, in America, you can go through high school, college, graduate school, never take a class in the religions of the world. Most Americans don't read the stuff. Most of the books about this stuff is boring. That's why I chose to use vignettes and stories and charts and so on. And so there's just a combination of boredom and ignorance that keeps people from asking the relevant questions. And then it's my grandmother's dictum to me: don't talk about religion and politics in polite company, But if we don't, we are setting ourselves up to have someone, say some things to us, do some things in our society, do some things from the Oval Office or from Congress or the Supreme Court that we're totally surprised by, but would have been anticipated by their faith had we known a little bit more about it.
Well, I love your approach. It's very thoughtful and interesting, and I love the vignettes that really put a humanizing face on the conversation.